And so we'll start with Dr. Fraser Taylor. He is the Chancellor's Distinguished Research Professor and Director of the Geomatics and Cartographic Research Center, or GCRC, in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And in December 2021, he was appointed Officer of the Order of Canada. He is an internationally renowned cartographer. His current research is focused on developing the field of cyber cartography, which he first defined in 1997. Established in 2003, GCRC undertakes extensive research and publication, technological development of the Plenary Digital Atlas mapping framework, and national and international interdisciplinary project development with academic institutions, indigenous groups, and others. A field of current focus includes language mapping and the reclamation and preservation of indigenous languages and place names. So Dr. Taylor, if you'd like to give your presentation.
Yes, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. And the title of my presentation follows on from our keynote speaker. Inclusion or exclusion? Question mark. I forgot the question mark. Mapping indigenous knowledge. Next slide, please. And the next one. The theme of this session is inclusion. The implicit reference is that inclusion is a good thing. I'm going to argue this is not always the case, which is why I've put the question mark. Now, we've been working with indigenous groups, particularly in Canada's north, with the Inuit, for over 2 decades. And those of you who are interested in our work can see it on our website. Next slide, please. The overall topic of this meeting is ethics. And as far as indigenous communities are concerned, the ethics are quite straightforward. Mapping indigenous knowledge must first and foremost be for the advantage of the communities involved. And what is mapped and how this is mapped are issues to be decided from the bottom up, not from the top down. Next one. I'm arguing for a fundamental change in power relationships, which many cartographers and many national mapping organizations will have difficulty coming to terms with. It's fairly radical, going to the roots of the issues. It's not primarily a technical issue, although there are technological elements, such as the choice to use open source software, as opposed to various proprietary alternatives. If inclusion means a loss of control by indigenous communities, then inclusion is not a good idea. If inclusion can be achieved without loss of control and to the advantage of the communities concerned, then a case can be made for pursuing it. Next one. For centuries, indigenous communities have been subject to what I call and others call cartographic colonialism. What was mapped and how that mapping was carried out was decided from the outside, with little or no input from the communities concerned, except to provide the knowledge, the external power needed to pursue its own objectives. These objectives included land acquisition, forced resettlement, resource exploitation, and cartography played a major role in the colonial attitudes. Next one, please. The most visible remnants of the place names still appearing on many maps. These were often the names of explorers, military establishments, created by the dominant external power in pursuit of their political objectives. After centuries of abuse, things are beginning to change, but change has been slow. I note with interest that California in September this year passed a bill to remove the use of derogatory place names using the S words, and this was followed by action at the federal level in October. Next. Indigenous knowledge. We can't change the past, but we can take steps to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. If Indigenous knowledge is to be included in modern mapping, it must be on terms which are very different from the past. More of the same simply will not do. Indigenous knowledge is increasingly recognized as a parallel and equal knowledge system to that of Western scientific knowledge. It has much to contribute in its own right, especially on environmental topics, and is much more than an affirmation of Western knowledge. Co-creation of knowledge is a step in the right direction, but often doesn't go far enough. We must learn more of the rich processes by which Indigenous people relate to their environment. Next. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Atlas of Arctic Bay in northern Canada. A key step is to listen to what Indigenous people have to say. And here the problems of semantics loom large, because many of the terms and expressions in Indigenous languages do not translate well into English, and as a result, are not fully understood. Now, what happens when Indigenous communities are given the power to create their own maps? I use as an example the creation of the Atlas of Arctic Bay, which was created some years ago. Both the content and the processes by which the atlases were created are interesting. The rich place names and the stories behind each place name replace those of the colonial area. Previously empty spaces on maps were replaced by living history, which had meaning to the local community. Next. When the local people were given the power to decide what they wanted to map, it came as quite a surprise to outsiders. One of the most interesting ones was the choice of the young people to create a rap video. And this is the URL for the rap video. It went viral on Facebook in its own right. But they were looking at things like the place names and the important stories behind the place names. So there was always a spoken element of the place names. Next, please. The local people, it was a complete community involvement, including these kids shown on this slide. The whole community became involved, and they were anxious to ensure that their lake, called Dead Dog Lake, was included. So we invited them in, and they put in their own place name for the lake. Next. The elders told the stories. The youth who were computer literate entered these into the Atlas using the open source Nunavut program. Nunavut means community in Inuktitut and was developed specifically for ease of use by non-experts in the low bandwidth situation prevalent in the Canadian North at that time. Even the children became involved. And for the first time, maps were being created which had real meaning to the local people. Next. There are a number of principles out there: FAIR, CARE, and OCAP. Next one, please. The FAIR guiding principles were published as scientific data: findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse of digital assets. Next. To afford some Indigenous data greater protection, CARE was introduced: collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and for the first time, ethics. Next. That didn't go far enough. In Canada, the First Nations principles of OCAP were defined and are an improvement. Indigenous ownership, Indigenous control, access, and possession. There are still important legal and ethical and social issues to be resolved, but we're moving in the right direction. Next, please. If Indigenous communities are to be ethically and effectively included in a new approach to mapping, then their digital sovereignty must first be developed. This should include training and resource support for giving priority to the expressed needs of Indigenous communities. In many cases, existing capacity is not adequate, but has to be built from scratch. Once built, then we need to maintain and further develop digital sovereignty, and this will take time and patience. Next, please. Only when we have redressed the effects of centuries of cartographic colonialism can we effectively and ethically include Indigenous communities and the value contribution that Indigenous knowledge has to bring to key issues. Progress is being made in the spirit of reconciliation in Canada. If Indigenous priorities are met first, then meaningful and mutual respectful partnerships are more likely to succeed. Replacing centuries of cartographic colonialism is no easy task. Next one. I started off by posing the question of whether Indigenous should be included or excluded. The answer to this question depends on how the issues I've outlined in this presentation are addressed. I very much enjoyed our keynote speaker's address and emphasized some of the key points she makes. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. Dr. Taylor. We will be holding questions for the panel talks, but thank you for your powerful message. That inclusion really must include all peoples, especially working and Indigenous people need control, and also your examples from different methods from youth to the elders to tell their stories. And then ending with the principles that can guide us as cartographers. So thank you. And there may be some questions that we could that could be addressed during the panel discussion.